Well, everyone, the Nintendo DS, the original one, actually came out many years ago, and it's time to talk about it yet again in 2022. Now, the last couple of years, I've been talking about all the Nintendo lineup, and I recently started up a third channel to talk about even more gaming-related content. And in this specific case, the original Nintendo DS was one of those consoles that I really think revolutionized the rest of Nintendo because, in my opinion, if we never got the DS, we probably would have never been at the point of the Nintendo Switch being a combination of a portable console and a, at-home console. When the Nintendo DS came out, this one, we actually had, the GameCube that was out during this time, but we also had the Nintendo Wii that was going to be coming out as well. And for the remainder of their lineup for many years after, they differentiated the portable consoles and the at-home consoles. So they kind of tackled both sides of the coin, which is actually really cool. Now, there's no portable or at-home console, there's just the Nintendo Switch, which kind of is a culmination of both. But the DS, this one, is one of my favorite consoles of all time, and although I didn't own the original one when it first came out, I did get the Nintendo DS Lite a couple of years after this, I think around 2008 or 2007 or something like that, whenever that one came out, and that one was one of my favorite consoles. But this one, when you actually look at it, it's very interesting to see how dated this specific console looks over the other consoles. So with this original Nintendo DS, you can actually see that, with my silver model, it definitely doesn't look as good as the newer consoles that came out. It does have a little bit of a weird texture up top. It looks like it kind of caves in, and I never liked this, but the top panel actually is bigger than the smaller bottom panel, and I don't mean the screens. I'm talking about the whole entire, width of the top portion is smaller than the bottom portion, and there seems to always have been a gap between the actual, panel itself at the bottom, and this was another thing I didn't really like too much about it. Mostly because it made it look really weird. I mean, when you actually had it in clamshell mode, it didn't really give the impression that it was super premium or that it was like, super, or that it was like, very durable, because if you spilled anything on it, there could always be some crumbs that kind of get in between the gaps. And it wasn't until the Nintendo DS Lite that really kind of changed things for sure. Now, luckily for us, we had the DS slot up the top, so nothing changed there, but this console was backwards compatible with Game Boy Advance games, which was amazing. Having that type of capability and playing those older games is awesome, and we actually still had that capability for a ton of consoles after this, including the 3DSs as well, which was another really cool thing. I don't know if many people are still playing Game Boy Advance games in terms of their, actual physical games anymore. I think most people play via emulator, but that's still an awesome thing that this specific console had. Now, on top of that, we had the Stylus, which was really cool. We had, the charging port, which was, much like the Game Boy Advance SP, we were able to charge this console, which I was really happy about. Before on my Game Boy Advance, I would always have to, change out the batteries, and that was a very annoying thing, and that didn't even have a backlight. With the original Nintendo DS, we actually had that capability, which was really cool. On top of that, with this specific Nintendo DS, we did have, a little bit of a different design when we open up this console as well. So you can see, I mean, the panels were the same sizes, luckily, but you can see how different the interior was. I mean, we had the, analog buttons on the left side. We had the power button on the top left, which was actually just a power button. It wasn't like a slide knob that we had on the next DSs. Then we had the AB, buttons on the right side, and as well as the start and select buttons. Now, the funny thing is that when I hold my original Nintendo DS and I hold my, DS Lite, the differences are crazy. I cannot believe that these two consoles were, side by side within one another. And I actually kind of feel bad for people who bought the original Nintendo DS because the DS Lite was so much of an upgrade in so many different ways. Now, the panels themselves aren't horrible. They'll definitely get the job done. But again, when you compare them to the next, successors of this thing, including the DS Lite, there were some pretty big differences, so that was a pretty big thing to keep in mind as well. Now, that's kind of enough about the outside of these consoles. Turning them on and kind of going through maneuvering them, you have to remember that this console did bring a couple of awesome things at that time. So this thing brought a touchscreen at the bottom, which was really cool. It did bring a built-in microphone, which was also really cool, and it did bring some Wi-Fi capabilities as well. So those three things in and of itself might seem like pretty basic things nowadays, but those were pretty big, features at that point. And since then, I mean, to give you some perspective, the iPhone, the original one came out in 2007. This console came out in 2004 and it had a touchscreen. So when you think about it like that, it's actually pretty interesting. But even bigger than that, it brought a dual screen gaming system. That was something we never really thought of before, and I always thought that was kind of a novelty, but I actually did kind of like it. And even now, there are still some reasons why you would have a dual screen, device. And in this case, I actually did like it a lot. Now, the rest of the UI was pretty basic. You could do picto chat, but there wasn't really a full-on UI like we had on the Nintendo DSi. That was a fully fledged operating system. You can do anything with that for the most part. With this original Nintendo DS, there really wasn't much. If you didn't have a game, you can go do like DS Remote Play or, Download Play, whatever it's called. But there really wasn't a whole lot going for this console besides the actual games. But that was the best thing about the whole entire Nintendo DS lineup. The gaming library of this console is crazy. And if you actually get a Nintendo DS, you can pretty much rest assured that you're going to have a long supported device without a doubt. The thing about this original Nintendo DS is that consoles like this will pretty much just live on forever because their games that they came out with this game console with are just everlasting. They are some of the best games ever made, and rightfully so. When Nintendo released this console, they already put this console in such a great position because it was backwards compatible with Game Boy Advance games. So because of that, not only were you getting the next set of console games that were going to be coming out for this specific console, but you had the ability of playing Game Boy Advance games as well, which is another humongous asset. So although at that point there were still games that were being developed, you have to remember that this console, as well as the DS Lite, could play so many games for so many years after. And that's one of my favorite things about this original Nintendo DS. Although it doesn't look beautiful anymore, although it isn't probably the best, feeling thing either, at least the games that it could play are, everlasting. Some of my favorite games, obviously New Super Mario Bros., Super Mario 64, the DS version. Animal Crossing was one of my favorite games at that moment. And the thing is now, you don't really need to have a DS to actually play DS games. There are so many emulators and different ways to play these games now, even on our iPhones and Androids. That's been the case for many years now. But there is just something about having the hardware, especially with this original Nintendo DS, that pretty much, signified the beginning of Nintendo's portable console lineup again. Their Game Boy Advances, all these consoles sold like crazy. This original Nintendo DS I think sold kind of well, but the DS Lite was definitely a big upgrade. So what I will tell you about the Nintendo DS is that it is still a very good collector's item. If you are just wanting to collect all the Nintendo DS lineup, then you can't really go wrong with getting the original Nintendo DS, because you will have to have that in order to kind of, finish up your collector's, box, whatever you want to call it. However, a big thing to keep in mind is that with the Nintendo DS, I wouldn't recommend buying this to play the games on this console. I would recommend buying a DS Lite or even a DSi XL at the bare minimum. And the main reason for this is because with a console like the original Nintendo DS, it doesn't feel as premium as those newer consoles, and things like the battery life I feel like were better on the DS Lite, at least from the DS that I bought, as well as the screens look better on the newer consoles as well. So if you want to get the best experience from playing from a console, I would recommend buying a DS Lite or DSi XL. However, this original Nintendo DS is pretty much the starting point of so many consoles that came out after it, and it's very interesting how Nintendo went and kind of redefined a gaming console with this type of body, with this type of dual screen technology, and it brought Wi-Fi, a touchscreen, and Wi-Fi capability as well. So in terms of that pretty much covers it up. If you guys have any other questions or anything like that, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.